have our very special guest. This is our fourth speed run interview series. We've been basically talking to people who work at game companies, a little bit about what happens behind the scenes and things like that. And I'm very happy to welcome Brandon Reeder, which if I can get my exact titlings right, I believe you are the audio lead for gameplay at League of Legends. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, and as before, we're going to have a little bit of me interviewing a little tiny bit for maybe like 20 minutes or ish, and then basically we'll open it up to the floor on Twitch and to ask questions. So please feel free to ask questions and stuff like that, and Austin will relay them to me, and I will then ask them. All right. So. Let's just get started, I guess. Welcome, Brandon.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I'm excited for this.
Oh, awesome. Great. So I guess, we always start someplace, and we have to start where we start at the beginning and things like that, and say, like, kind of, well, how did you get into doing professional audio? And then how did you get your first gig in game audio, I would say? Like, what direction did you come from in that respect?
Yeah, so I had a bit of a journey, and I think a lot of people do. I was doing electronic music just kind of as a hobby and for fun, kind of like in the back room. And I'm from Arizona, so I would do a few live shows out with a number of friends. It was a collective, and we would run a venue called Through the Wires. And it was nothing where I was getting paid to do this professionally. It's just kind of a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize that my interest in electronic music was actually going to be like the catalyst for knowing how to use plugins and how to actually like think about audio.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had my family. I was working at a job that I was not happy with, and we were my wife was having a baby shower downstairs, and so I went upstairs and I was going to go play some League of Legends. And I thought, you know what? Like, I think I could do this music. And they had a sound design position to apply for, but I had no clue that the music and sound design was two different things. So I applied and got a test back. And I had no clue what to do. So I was using at the time Battery from Native Instruments, and I just started using drum samples to kind of create the sound effects. And I didn't understand some of the interview questions. I had no clue what Fmod was. I didn't know what WISE was. And so the interview was a really good jumpstart into trying to look for the right direction. And so I went to find schools because the interview was a no. And I wanted to get in. Like at that point, I was like, "How do I get in?" So I went to go do a bunch of research.
You were bitten by the bug at that point, basically.
Yes, yeah, it was like no stopping at that point. So I went and did some research, and I would ask people at work, like, "Is this crazy? Should I sell my house and move to go to do my school and move my family?" And I was like, "Dude, don't do that." And so I did it, and I, went to Vancouver Film School, and I enjoyed my experience. The teachers, I learned a lot out there. It was for 1 year, and we had another child when we were in Vancouver, so that was she was our souvenir.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did while I was in school was I kept in touch with the person that I interviewed with, and this was Jay Watford at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sent my tests and all those things that we talked about the things that I worked on. And so at the final of my school, I sent him my final mix and sound design.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what basically that interaction and not taking no for an answer and being
Mm-hmm.
persistent, but also professional, allowed for me to keep that door open. And so I was able to jump through that window of opportunity when it hit.
Wow. That sounds fantastic. Wow. Cool. So, and I guess it's an interesting because I'm always asking these questions because of the fact that oftentimes, I came in completely, like, for example, you've been playing. I mean, you've been playing games for a long time, I'm guessing, right?
Yes.
So, like, how long how long ago was the earliest game that you would say you first played when you were a tiny kid or whatever?
I mean, I have fond memories of one of my favorite games was we would go to Flagstaff and we'd go with family to go on like a sledding trip, you know,
Okay.
because we were kids.
Mhm.
And a cousin had brought a Nintendo at the time, and we were playing Mario Brothers 2. And that was like just the sound of pulling up the turnips out of ground, like just that it was like addicting to go and pull things out of the ground, you know, it was
In other
super
words,
satisfying.
the sound made it a satisfying enough sound that you kept wanting to do the thing, basically.
Yeah, and it was also the mood that it set, you know, I was in this cozy cabin with all my cousins and family members, and,
Mhm.
you know, like, everyone's dressed up in their gear, and we're playing, you know, video games, and we're getting yelled at because we gotta go outside and go sledding and, you know, interact with the outside, but we wanted to pull up turnips, you know, we wanted to play the video game, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I like to ask these questions because I definitely, even though I played video games, I was a Macintosh user, which means I didn't really play video games. Like I found like games like Strategic Command, and then like Civilization. Right, Civilization was
yeah,
like the game that kind of like put me into an addictive sort of thing. But I never owned a console, never once. So my only experience in video games from, let's say, the 80s ish is going to like Godfather's Pizza and playing, that. And then maybe my cousin's place where they got an Atari, 2600 just before the market
yeah,
crashed, kind of thing. And we, played stuff. But it's funny. I definitely remember, having played the Pac-Man version on Atari and being, disappointed in the quality of what I was getting compared to the arcade version. So it's like I
yeah.
had the tiniest feeling of the video game crash feeling. The, oh crap, these are just crappy games and stuff like that. Anyway,
I didn't understand the gameplay cues. I didn't understand them
right,
sonically. I was just so immersed in the story and the gameplay, you know. I was like, I'm done with school. Like, I want to come home from school, maybe eat my snack and then go play Battletoads or go play some Narc. And I
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I didn't understand the sound cues and how it would play an important part in my life when I get older.
Right.
It was just enjoying that moment. It was enjoying like the hard levels and trying to get through it. Use the Game Genie, try to make up my own codes, which would never work.
Oh wow.
But
Okay.
yeah, it
So you were
was.
kind of on the hacker side a little bit too.
I tried. I mean, Game Genie was really cool because they give you the booklet of codes, and
Right.
then they
Right.
say
Right.
you can make your own. And I never excelled at that. I would like try it and then never do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Cool. Because I definitely got into some programming ish type stuff. I never considered myself a hardcore programmer. But so one thing that I was going to ask was a little bit about when. So when did you start realizing that when you would make sound effects for a game, that would be a non-linear experience versus a linear experience? Like, in other words, did you, like, for example, did you not know until you start working for Riot that it actually that's what was, that everything was a separate asset and everything like that?
Right. So, let me give a little bit more to the backstory here, which might
Yeah.
actually help with some of
Cool.
this answer.
Yeah.
So when I got the job at Riot Games, mind you, when I went to Vancouver Film School, I actually had we actually like got to play with Wise, you know,
Oh,
and we got to work with another design team at Vancouver Film School, and we got to kind of implement with them. And so I did have a little bit of an understanding of
good.
linear versus game, but when I got hired, I was hired as an audio mixer. So I would work on the YouTube video content. My first one was Brahms'
Ah,
Champion Spotlight. So I'm
okay.
literally mixing volumes, making sure stuff does go out in stereo. And during that whole time, I've never done sound design other than school. And so I was, you know, my peers, I had a number of peers uh, that worked before me that were doing amazing sound design, you know,
Hmm.
and a lot of these peers actually were part of our music team, which is they've done the Pentakill album. So there was huge shoes to fill in terms of like how do I sound design and make sure I hit that quality bar. It was
Right.
terrifying. So
Yeah.
I'm an audio mixer, and I'm there for a year trying to figure out how that pipeline would function.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to put my best foot forward. But the whole time I'm like, I know I'm going to transition to the personalization team, which is the skinning team where we do all the champion skins.
Right.
And I thought I was going to lose my job. I thought like mentally I'm like preparing to go in there, not, you know, not be able to cut it. and then go home and say, listen, I just got let go. I was actually really terrified. And so
Oh,
when I moved to that team, that's when I realized I had the person who was training me at the time. This is Kevin Notar. He had a very unique way of teaching me and basically onboarding me, which was like put the assets in the game. That's how I want to hear it. And I was so used to like, come listen to my content. It's in the DAW. I use Pro Tools, by the way.
right, right, right,
He would come listen to the DAW, and he didn't want to hear it that way, and I didn't understand that. And it was like,
right.
dude, I don't even want to hear it until it's in the game. And I was like, and then I understood because all those pieces needed to move,
Oh, absolutely.
sequential in the order that it's supposed to be designed. So I have all these little assets here and there, and like in the DAW, it was great because you can go past the edges. You can kind of go outside of the
Right.
lines.
You can reorder things, right? And then you have to still hear the results when you reorder them, as opposed to
Exactly.
like if you just do it as a film, then that's it. You've got that one linear
Hmm.
pass, and that you have to hope that no one's going to do something different,
Yep.
in that time period when they're actually playing the game, right? And
Yep.
yeah, that makes a total amount of sense. That's interesting. That's quite good. Yeah. So let me think about anything else that I can think of there. Um, so that's cool. I mean, so it does seem like that Riot does have a good, reasonably good in place sort of training sort of setup. Like in other words, they sort of help the new employees pretty well, I guess, instead of sort of dumping you out there like you said.
We are constantly updating our onboarding. Like
Okay.
it's always changing because there's a lot of things that take place, meaning change. There's constant change through our pipelines,
Yeah.
through the number of pipelines, from the way that our teams function. That onboarding, I don't think for any company onboarding is easy, because
Right.
you're teaching not only the pipeline and whatnot. You're teaching the craft, you're teaching the quality bar, you're teaching how things, the standards, like there's so many pieces that pipeline is ever changing. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you're constantly having to train all the time because things are constantly
Yes.
changing. Right.
Yes. And we actually have a documentation that we all put in. Not one person is just saying, hey, this is what it is, follow this. Each one of us can go through an experience and contribute our information and say, okay, where's that doc? This actually wasn't so great. And you go and update it. And for the next person, so the next time they go through, they have the information they need. So we're constantly like updating and making things a little bit more improved.
Yeah. Awesome. The one of the things that I was quite the part of at least partially started this whole conversation with people at Riot in the first place was actually a Brennan Anderson who came in recently, and the thing is that he actually hit me to a series that you guys did called Frequencies or are doing. And what I thought was really great about it was it actually explained a lot more of the pre-production artistic process, specifically about things like if you have a character in this, like it's like an esports sort of thing, and the idea is that what happens is that when people are playing that character over and over again, and you have to make a new skin for that character, for the same character, or you're designing a new skin, that you have to basically stay within the boundaries of the sound design concept that you've basically taken for that character so that the players who are playing that character don't suddenly have completely different sound effects that they're dealing with when they're playing their game. They have to know that when they hit the ultimate for this particular character, it's going to sound a particular way, and you can make a variation on the ultimate, but you can't make a completely different ultimate sound because you're restricted by, what people will expect in a championship sort of match situation, as opposed to just, whatever, just anybody at home playing it, all the time, So I thought that was a really interesting, you had a really like detailed kind of design document, if you will, before you
Hmm.
even go and make the sounds and say, here's what a Vi or Caitlin or whatever like that have to sound like in terms of the amount of inharmonicity versus harmonicity. That means like noise versus pitch, essentially,
Yep.
and that kind of stuff. And I thought that was really helpful in terms of that kind of stuff. So yeah.
There's a lot of fine lines there too. And I think what's really what I really enjoy about our team is that each one of us has creative I would just creative opportunity, creative freedom.
Hmm.
We will own that champion. If someone gives me a champion or a skin, we own that process, and we are the SMEs in terms of like what do we want to. So we explore and we take that
I'm
time. And
sorry, SME is what?
SME is basically subject matter expert, right? So
Okay, got it.
basically the person who knows and understands, and for us as audio, we are the SMEs with audio for that champion. So
Right,
we are trusted with autonomy to go out and to explore, to do our due diligence to find out what is the background of this champion. If it's a
got it.
skin, it's like, okay, who worked on it before? What kind of thing? You go in, you play that champion, and you go and listen, and you're trying to get the idea. So when someone goes in with a skin and they have a thematic, it's like they're going to explore that thematic. They're going to create new, what we call building blocks, which is kind of like a color palette that you would use to
Right.
finalize your assets.
I remember like coming across that mention of the color palette, but in sound effectively, right?
Hmm.
That's the idea, which it's a sound palette basically.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's fantastic. I really dig that. And then the idea, of course, is that they would also use those for the cinematics, that
Yeah.
they do for those characters, especially if it's like a new character or a variation on a character or something for a special occasion or whatever. Yeah.
They use those when we're creating our assets. We actually try to bounce out a number of, like, those building blocks will be at a high, fidelity,
Yeah.
and they can be used for cinematics. They like Brad Beaumont and Elliot. They're both using that stuff on Arcane and other projects. They can use those things, and it helps build our IP, helps build the world, and to create a better environment. Yeah.
Right. Now, according to Roman, he said that you had gotten start, or that you had been very heavily involved before this in making skins, right? Making sounds
Mhm.
for the skins for the characters, is right? How long did you ended up doing that before you sort of
Um, just probably just over a year. And so
Mm, okay.
remember, I was afraid to go and be a sound designer because I was an audio mixer. Then I was going to be sound design. I was totally, scared of
Yeah.
the the ability to even know how to create sound. And so
Right.
I have a one of my favorite experiences was my one of my first champions. One of my first skins was Project Master Yi, and I was terrified. And so the thing that I do, which I still do now because it's helped me out, is I was overcompensating for the amount of assets that I would probably need to use. So
Okay.
I would create a large amount of building blocks. I mean,
Okay.
I would probably spend like that, a 2 to 4 weeks, typically two, and I would try to create between 15 and 30 gigs of assets of that I would use. And so I would just create. I would dive into doing synth work. I would dive into like reprocessing. I would reprocess things 4 to 5 times.
Wow.
And I would just go at it. And
So we're talking
I
50. Are we talking 15 to 30 gigs of like?
15 to 30 gigs. And I record at 96K. So like you
Oh,
get the
96.
slight
Okay,
kick.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. All right. So,
Yeah.
but still,
Um,
15, 30 gigs, even at 96, that's a lot of files.
that I was that terrified. I was like,
Oh
I'm
my
not gonna lose
God.
this job, baby. I'm gonna probably need this. I might need this. And so, but one, I didn't fully understand. I think this is, going along the lines of like, what makes things successful
Yeah.
is knowledge sharing. And
Yeah.
all of us have really cool ideas. Everyone on the team has experience in the industry, they have ideas, and it's really awesome. And no one's afraid to share those because whatever you share is going to help that person, but who they are and how they create, they
Mm.
can create their own thing with your same process, right?
Hmm.
And Jay Watford, at the time, my manager,
Yeah.
I was very terrified to show off my assets in a review.
Right.
And I showed them. Everyone was very respectful, even though I know they were kind of derpy and probably not hitting the bar, but they
Yeah.
were saying like, dude, this is really cool. And he said on the way out, without him, no micromanaging and not saying like, you need to go back and do this. He just gave a simple suggestion, which was, why don't you have you heard of the Altiverb plugin? Because we all had it. He
Uh-huh.
says you should try taking those sounds and running them as an IR into Altiverb. And right at that moment, that, like, I went back to my desk, I tried it out, and that just like blew my mind open. And I was like, oh, I can do other things with audio. So then, like, I went into doubler and I started putting like 5 doublers in a row, and then I would do weird things, and then I would create these really interesting things, and that's how I got into opening my mind to
Wow.
sound design a little bit more.
That's really cool. Right. And because you didn't originally start to, now the thing is though, I'm kind of curious about this because I've definitely heard of situations in which there was a gentleman who I know, a guy named Sam Marshall, who actually was doing, he was like an intern at like Sony Music and stuff like that. And he was just doing all kinds of stuff. But one of the things that he always never failed to do, because he always considered himself a composer. And even though he was doing these sort of intern types of things, he ended up, he wanted to basically make sure that he would tell them, tell the the supervisors, hey, I do music. By the way, here's some music that I've done. And then eventually what happened is that once he got hired at some point, there was a point at which they kind of were like, hey, we've got this game called Entwined. I think you'd be good for that. But the idea is that he was able to get that by not putting his light under, not hiding his light, essentially. In other words, he was, as you say, being respectful, but occasionally still saying, hey, by the way, I do these things, I do these other kinds of things. So if in case you're looking for this, I was just kind of curious, did you just I think it sounds like to me like you just sort of made the transition and then decided that you were good at sound design, essentially, and that you enjoyed doing it, and wanted to do that more than you wanted to, say, do music remixing and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, really, I'm actually ecstatic that I am doing sound design. I didn't ever think it would do that. I wanted to get into film composing, and I had a
Right.
very it didn't work out that way, but I ended up
Well, you went to
being
Vancouver Film School. There you
I
go.
went to Vancouver Film School, and I ended up being fascinated. I loved that I could remanipulate sound. I felt like I was in control of manipulating this idea of what was one thing and then turning it into something else, and then layering and layering and layering, and then taking it even further. And it's like, what sounds interesting, and trying to dive in, what is iconic? What makes things iconic?
Right.
Is it the time elapse? Is it the tonal? What is There's different pieces that are just interesting and fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the idea is that if you're doing like a character skin, then it's sort of like it's like interactive branding,
Mhm.
like, so in other words, you're making these sounds that are completely identifiable for the character, but they don't last very long, right? That's the idea. And so you have all these, different
Yep.
different sound effects, but they all have to be sort of iconically related to the same character. And I feel like it's a similar situation as like making a logo for a brand, or something like that, that kind of thing. It's like you have to make all everything sort of, relate in a very, specific kind of emotional way, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah. I don't think where I work at Riot Games,
Yeah.
they definitely value craft, and they want to hear the ideas. And a lot of people have started out in different areas. They do what's called lane swapping, or one example would be Eugene Kang. Eugene Kang is one of our sound designers,
Yeah.
also the bassist in our Pentakill album, and does music. And that's not just to say him. There's also other people who do sound design and music,
Right.
and they are just very creative, and we love collaboration.
Yeah.
I don't make music at all,
Yeah.
professionally, but I will collaborate with our composers. And if a new champion's coming out, maybe the composer will say, hey, do you have any building blocks? And I'll send those over, and then then they get inspired. So it's all about kind of like uh cross-pollinating inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds fantastic. So, hey, Austin, do we have I was just kind of curious if we had any questions at this point in time in the Twitch.
Yeah. Let's see here. We got Digiboy Bit asks, does each skin get a separate sound library even for similar attacks?
Yes. So they do, but it goes based off of tier. Like, we have different tiers, legendary, the 1350, there's legendaries, there's ultimate skins, and they can go lower. But the higher tiers get a full kit. They'll get like all the spells, the Q, W, E, R, the passive, they'll get new auto attacks, obviously, and variations, emotes, and voice lines as well. So yeah, it depends on the tier, and then we'll get just a full audio replacement.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're saying that the lower tiers don't get as much as the higher tiers do.
Yeah, so lower tiers is basically like, well, how much resources are we putting into it?
Right.
If there's like a 750, we're trying to maintain the base assets. So there is tech there that pulls from the base champion to go to the skin that's only 750. But what's really the only like value that we want to put into that isn't spending too much resources?
Right.
And those things sell for much cheaper, but you might just get like a recall. you know.
Got it.
And then when you go up to like 1350, then you get legendaries, ultimates, then you get some ultimates probably actually get like an actual added piece and or like a hidden, you know,
You have
control
to
5 type thing.
you have to reward the investment, basically, is what it boils down to. Like, in other words, if they're spending more money, then you give them more stuff. Essentially, is sort of
Yes, you can have an experience in the champion. You can also have it outside the champion in kind of like the tentpole event that might come with releasing an ultimate skin, or like a pack, you know, like the Odyssey pack was a really
okay.
really awesome event.
Yeah, cool.
All right, a couple more. Jacob Woods asks, I think we touched on this, but what was your first ever paid audio job at Riot?
My first ever paid audio job at Riot was the Braum champion spotlight, and I had no clue what I was doing. I just went in there and I was just mixing with the mouse. I think I didn't have faders yet. I was mixing with the mouse and trying to make it sound cool and trying to, you know, just trying to understand the pipeline, but that would have been my first paid job. Yeah.
Okay. David asks, how do you go about creating an iconic original sound, but also get that sound to blend and fit in the world without it being distracting or taking away from player immersion?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think this is where I create for myself a number of building blocks. So let's, for example, I'm going to dive into one of the champions I worked on. This is Kaisa.
Mhm.
And she was considered the daughter of the void. And I had actually started understanding what the concept work was. That was number one. Now, understanding how to build for League of Legends, I had already been doing that over time, and I think that just kind of grew on me, which is like, what things are we looking for, what type of sound quality. And so that was already kind of instilled, and that was through just the process of doing sound design, right? But for looking for a specific champion, I spent a lot of time understanding the concept work and then going out and trying to find what would be interesting sounding. And so her suit was alive. And at the very, very early concept stages of Kaisa's suit, I was thinking, man, it would be so cool if we had VO for her. And then we had VO for the suit. And so she could talk back and forth to the suit. And so
Wow.
I created a lot of just weird, you know, I recorded people talking, eating a banana, and then talking is very, you know, crackly and gross, and used, there's the D clicker, which I think a lot of people do this, but there's a D clicker in RX. And if you can just collect the outputs, then you have the envelopes of these weird kind of clicky things. I played with a frog collar, just weird clicky things to create this suits, you know, dialogue. And so it was just too disgusting. It was gross. And so I bring it back to the team. Everyone was like, oh, this just, it's cool, but it's gross. And no
It's
one
just not
wanted to
gonna
hear
work.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had to go reprocess it. I think I ended up using Synaptic Morph, and I processed the clicks with some vintage museum printing machines, and it just rounded things off. It sounded almost mechanical, but still organic. And now her suit, it's still there. That's Oliver Foley.
Yeah.
But her suit doesn't talk, but it turned into the Foley. So it's all about exploration and I didn't ever think like, oh, I'm going to go in there and make some clicky stuff and then morph it with this. Like, it was all process of elimination, thinking, oh man, I hope I come up with something. It's just, let's try things out.
Right. I mean, the thing that I would get a little bit like overwhelmed by is like, if you're making 30 gigs of stuff and then it's just sort of like, well, what's good? You know, how do you sort the wheat from the chaff at that point when you have so much material? It's great to have, you know, a huge palette, but then the idea ends up being is like, God, you have way too many choices, it feels like to me. But it does seem like what you do is you get lots of really good feedback from your team members. You get a lot of good feedback from, you know, saying, I think this looks like the direction, or I'm feeling like this is the right direction for this particular character, and that sort of stuff. And that kind of encourages to find the area that you were doing that sound in and then go, okay, yeah, I need to do more of that stuff, essentially.
What exactly? So we like I said, we're given this autonomy to go and be creative. But what happens is we take all of those things and we have like a weekly sync, we bring it back, we actually have pods that we work in, and we ask for feedback like you're mentioning. And so I'll have a document called an audio one sheet that I've talked about in that
I heard about the one sheet
and
in
the
the
other YouTube thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'll get feedback and say, what does everyone think? Here's the context. and I'll tell them all about this new champion or skin. Here's the context. I would love feedback, any suggestions or ideas. And that helps us keep us in line. And that's really kind of the answer to the question here, which is, how do you create for this thing? It's like you go be creative, and then you kind of bring it in, hone it in with all of your peers.
Right. Got it. That's awesome. That's really excellent. You get such useful feedback from the people there at the team, in terms of like, because otherwise I could feel like, you'd be floating, a little bit,
Yeah.
and just be like, well, okay, I think this is going to work because this is what I heard from before or whatever, I'll
Yep.
try and do something like that. Yeah. And they also encourage you to try to do different things and new things and new approaches to stuff. And that's really, that's super helpful, man.
Yeah.
Anyway, any other questions we have on the world?
Leo, you got any questions for Brandon?
No, I've got a ton of different questions, but I think they're all over the place. So for me, I'm just absorbing in all the information of what's going on, giving me ideas, because I'm working, like I said, on a small indie game right now and grabbing sound ideas. And it's always nice to hear different tricks and what other people are doing.
Yeah.
And how to process it. And then I've also got the task of implementing it. So that's a whole thing. But I was going to ask, I suppose, do you perform the implementation too, or are you just solely doing sound design?
Right. So that's a great question too. We all have different strengths on our team. That's what I really love this about our team, is that we have people who are very like excelled in the tech and understanding how these things work. They might just look at it or hear about it and they understand it. We have people who excel in the craft as well, or people who excel in both. And so we each kind of lean on each other. I am a lead on my team. I am not great at tech at all. Now, do I love implementation? I do. And I love learning and I love asking questions, but I definitely lean on one of my peers. And I've leaned on both Javon Reimer and Tristan Medjo. I've leaned on them for help in this area because they're so good at it. And they help inspire me with thinking like, and it's okay that that happens. It's okay that they might know the solution, because their knowledge and helping you might actually inspire me to think, what about this way? And then we kind of like, collaborate again. So me personally, I love the craft. I love diving in. I love trying to push boundaries. I love using like 5 or 10 doublers in a row and seeing what happens to the power, outages. And so I just feel like there's so much in craft that I still don't know. And I love diving into that. But also on the implementation side, there's a huge, we got a tricky scenario where we're on an old engine, and we work with a live service game. This game is a very big game. There's a lot of champions, a lot of skins. To move this stuff around, there's massive implications. And not only just moving it around and those implications of tech and what we go on, but we're also global. And not everyone has the capacity to hold the type of patching that we would need to do to output this content. And so you have a large number of scenarios that could be very impacting that we have to be cognizant of and careful of. So that's kind of a big answer, but
No,
craft.
But it is an interesting thing noting that there's actual, because there's different game companies that do different stuff in terms of like, they want somebody to handle a little bit of everything essentially. Oftentimes, especially if it's a smaller game company, they don't have as big of a team. They have to basically, offload more work to one person. So that person then ends up being both doing the sound design and the implementation, possibly the music composition as well. The idea, but definitely I think that there's some strong things that where like, if you've done some stuff and you've improvised, you've designed some things, it's interesting because what happens is that I find this, because that's kind of how I got into the whole thing. Because I certainly have loved sound design for a long time. I think of myself mainly as a composer, but I'm very, very experimental in my compositional, approaches. So it tends to go really pretty quickly into sound design after that. But the thing is that when I started getting into games, which for me actually was only about a decade ago, really, in terms of like, hey, we need you to write a game audio course, and I'm like, okay, all right, I'll do this. I know some people who are in the industry. I can write about this with some degree of authority. I got more interested in how the sound was triggered rather than the actual sound itself. because it would be like, oh, well, yeah, that's just the epic explosion or the epic gun sound or the epic whatever the heck it is. But I got more interested in what happens behind the scenes. So my little observation in this particular case is like, you have a sound, and then maybe the implementers can show you kind of how you can trigger that sound in really cool and interesting and possibly randomized or semi-randomized ways, which you hadn't thought of because you were sitting there on your DAW and just playing it back one time, and just you only had the block, and you're not hearing how that sound block would happen as a a particle effect or something like that. So that's anyway, I think that's really cool because that's a very kind of cross-fertilizing environment effectively. Like you say, each side helps the other side effectively.
Totally. Yep.
Yeah. Very cool. Any more questions?
Yeah, we got a few. Let's see. Brandon, do you have a favorite synth or synth module that you go to?
Yes. Okay, so I love. Okay, where do I start? So I just recently picked up a Moog Subsequent 37. I love it. I love the arpeggiation. I just love playing with that thing. Even if I'm not using it all the time, like sometimes I'm just like, all right, I'm gonna take a break and just go put some headphones on and just hold down a key. I just have to hear the sound. But I love that. But I also have a modular synth. We're actually currently building one at our studio. But I have my own personal one, and I love DPO. If I could only have two, I would love just having DPO, and I love maths. Like just those two alone, like allow me to create just really interesting sounds. But that's in a modular synth.
So hang on, I'm looking for the DPO. I knew about maths. Hang on, DPO.
Yeah, it's a signal generator.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, so yeah, dual voltage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that Make Noise definitely makes really awesome stuff for sure.
And I have to say why I'm interested in this. Okay, so this goes back to like knowledge sharing and just so there's a documentary series called the Halo the Sprint. It's the Sprint series that Halo puts out.
Okay.
And there's some sound designers that were in there. This would be I think Robbie, Elias, and Kyle, and they are showing their audio and how they do stuff. And at the time modular synths were not something that I have known for my whole life. Like I just recently got into it, but they're showing how they do things and they're showing modular synth, and it's inspiring. It's like, what, you could do this? So you just dive in, like, why not? And dove in, and like, man, it is so fun. And it like just opens your mind up even more to the type of things you can create and just having fun. It's fun to take and show people. It's fun. Like I have 4 kids. It's fun to like show them stuff. Like there's just
it's extremely it's nothing but extremely hands-on. I mean, like it's literally like you're controlling the sound by just manipulating things, patching stuff, unpatching stuff, fantastic. I got an experience doing that because I went to Cal Arts. At the time that I went to Cal Arts, in the film school in the basement, they still had it's an interesting thing because there's like, we all, it's like styles, right? You go through, oh, well, the beards are in or beards are out, kind of thing. So modular was out at one time. And that was the time that I was in school. When I was in school, modular was out. Like that was it. Like everything was like boxes that were being controlled by MIDI essentially. So in the basement of the film school, they had the old Buchla 100 series modular synthesizer in the basement, and you just like patch stuff up. And it was ridiculous because it was a wall-sized thing. So it was very daunting to have to work with it and stuff like that. But you could kind of do what you could do.
It is daunting, yes.
Yeah, and they parted it out at the end of the year. That's it. They sold it out and everything like that. I managed to get one of the mixers, and it actually said San Francisco Tape Music Center on it.
Oh, cool.
Such a whole historic thing. But anyway, but the deal is that right after that point is like literally in the 90s, like right when Trent Reznor and Nine Inch Nails, I tend to think of that as the sort of starting point of that, and the virus synthesizer, oh my God, we have knobs back on synthesizers again. And then modular began to take off again. It's just really, that's pretty awesome that's really awesome. So no, that's really cool. In terms of the sound design, is there a particular? Is it Altiverb that you particularly like as an effect, a go-to effect?
I think it's one. No, I've mentioned Doubler a number of times. I love Doubler. I think it's just like the funnest thing to use. It's part of the Waves sound design suite.
Got it.
it just creates like feedback and resonance, and like you can play with it and manipulate it. But I love a lot of plugins. You know, I love sound toys. I love the GRM stuff. I like all that stuff, but I really love just soft synths as well. One of my favorite soft synths is IcePad, which is like a free user one from Native Instruments. I love Prism, and to manipulate and change those things. Like I like my thing that I like to do is I like to put in like at least 3 to 4 synths on one MIDI source and then control all of them. And I try to go through and manipulate things so that I have the sound that I want that each of them create.
Yeah.
And that allows me to be a little bit more like, I can be a little bit more expressive on a keyboard and create this magical content and then remanipulate it to take it even further. And that's what I like to do. So like, I love using Prism for that. I love IcePad. There's a new one that we had just tried out. Oh no, I'm gonna forget the name of it. It's brand new. It's not new, but it's some new to me. I think it's called Vital. Maybe
Oh
it's
yeah,
Vital.
yeah,
Yes.
Vital, which is actually like a free. I always make sure that I tell students about free stuff because
Yes.
sometimes we come from different economic backgrounds and stuff like that, and so I'm always looking for like what's out there that's really good, that's like shareware, and Vital had recently come out. And what's great, I love the different pricing schemes that people can kind of come up with. Like for example, Vital is like, I think there's a free version, but if you want to pay $15 for shareware, whatever, you can get more options, more skins, more waveforms. I love the ability to like scan your own wavetables in there. Bring your own samples in there, use those as wavetables for synthesizers. That to me is like the holy grail to have such flexibility as far as the sound design is concerned. I also like the Surge synth. Actually, that's another one that's open source.
Yeah.
And as good as something like Serum, which is pretty popular out there.
Yeah, Serum's cool.
Yeah. So I guess for the slightly less initiated among the Riot sort of thing, can you give me an idea of like, let's say how a new skin for a character is going to sort of develop? Like, where does it start, and where does it go to, and then how does it eventually end up being delivered? I should say.
Yeah, so it all starts on a pod, what we call a pod. So it's a group of disciplines, and so you'll have a sound designer, you'll have an animator, you'll have VFX, you'll have a game designer, you'll have tech, engineering, and narrative. Did I say narrative? And then you'll have someone kind of like producing the whole thing. So you'll have a pod of disciplines, and then the pod will take that information. They'll have someone creating. There's like concept art, and then you start like your whole like temp pass and putting everything in, and you're basically using the structure and the bones of the base champion. So it's already going to take the same shape.
You probably have a one pager already about that champion first of all, right?
Well, there is one for the base champion, yes, but you can also make one for your skin if you want to, because you're doing a whole new thematic.
Yeah.
And the thematic needs to be like, you're going to have a thing on that thematic. What things should you avoid? What things should you do? So you kind of have a little bit of guidance there.
Yeah.
And again, we're going back to the whole feedback rounds, right?
Right.
And so I think some of us do different ways. What I like to do is I'll take in the base assets and I'll put them on like a track above where I'm designing, and I'll look at it and you try the best you can, but sometimes it doesn't always work, but you try to stay within the envelopes and try to follow the envelopes with your new sound, and just try to make it feel like if there's a hard transient somewhere, or if there's something happening like a lead in, like you want to follow that envelope. We want to try to create the same feeling, different thematic. And so that's kind of what the approach is. So that's starting it, that's designing it. There's a lot of feedback loops there, play testing as well. And then you have your PBE, which is going to the beta testing. And then we do a lot of listening and listening to the community. That's like super important,
so
because
PBE is like playback environment or playback something.
Yeah, it's like the beta testing environment, but it's there for 2 weeks. And so we listen to the community feedback, and we're listening and thinking, okay, is this hitting the right way? And maybe people might respond with a lot of comments and saying, okay, this is not like, for example, I worked on the update for Kale, and I want to say it was for her for one of her skins, I had created a new sound effect, and it was just on the attack. And people were not happy with the fact that it had changed from her original. So I took the original and added it, the same sound, to the sound that I created, and had to, like, you know, I had to manipulate it and edit it, but
Yeah.
I had to bring back in that old flavor, that vanilla flavor.
And then once they could hear the original quality of the sound that was slightly altered, they were
Yes.
more comfortable with that approach, essentially.
Yeah, and maybe the functionality is different. Maybe when we hooked it up, there was some code that didn't have a toggle on for Fog of War. Maybe that wasn't working correctly. And so you can really alter people's gameplay and keep it from going into the esports, into the esport realm. So you have to be very cognizant and listening to the community and saying, like, hey, we should be changing this, you know, maybe let's not do this. Or so that testing period is a really good period. And then we have a cleanup period where it's like cleaning up our, you know, we're archiving our stuff, putting it on servers, and doing all the cleanup, making sure the Y is just nice and neat and tidy, and then it ships.
Okay, got it. Yeah, cool. Any other questions there, Austin?
Yeah, Leo, you have anything further for Brandon?
Sorry, again, I'm just capturing everything down.
And, no pressure. We can come back around if you'd like.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Digiboy Bit asks, what is the key to getting an audio job at a AAA company? Been stuck in the freelance zone.
Yeah, that's a great question too. The key, I mean, I don't know if I had the key, but I think I just didn't give up. That was a big thing. Like, I think getting a no is, when someone tells you no or you don't get a no, and if it's available, try to get that feedback and, you know, seeing what you can do better. But it's like, I was told no, and that impacted my whole family. We sold our home, I quit my job, and we moved up to Canada for a year, and then I was jobless afterwards. And so that was scary, and that was a huge change in our life. But I didn't stop. I stayed in contact with the person I was interviewing with. I made sure that I had all the things. I had to make sure I had, like, my final, which was part of my demo reel. I had my application ready to go. So and I didn't just apply there. I applied in a lot of different places.
Yeah.
So I wanted to build a really strong rapport with the people that I was interviewing with. But when I say don't take no for an answer, I don't mean being like, you know, like, you don't want to be a pest, and you don't want to be you don't want to be unprofessional about the way that you engage. I think that that's probably the key, is to be professional and to understand what good looks like. If you're trying to apply somewhere and you're listening to yourself, what is the place creating, and how are you trying to get to that level? And I know that a lot of that can be difficult because you may not have access to all the sound libraries, but there's a lot of free stuff out there that you can totally jump on board with.
Yeah, there's a lot more than there used to be. That is for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, I mean, it is kind of an interesting sort of situation in terms of, like, I always feel like the idea would be to respectfully, if they just say, hey, you didn't get the job, it is a useful idea to sort of respectfully reach out and say, you know, hey, what is it that I didn't do, or, you know, or that you expected from me that you didn't get, if you don't mind, you know, giving me some feedback on that kind of thing. And that's I think that's super helpful. Yeah, Leo, you had your hand up.
I was just going to piggyback on this because I think some people might find it valuable, but is there any advice that you'd have over putting together a demo reel for the application process?
Yes, I think what it goes to is, like, the place that you're applying to, really trying to hit, like if we've had some demo reels come in where, you know, we are obviously a MOBA, we're 5v5, or yeah, we're 5v5, and it makes it would make sense to have things that would be sound that's created for something like that. And so maybe we'll get a demo reel that has maybe nothing to do with that, but all for VO and for linear, you know, or music. And so it gets difficult because there may be really good talent in those areas, but it's not very fitting for what we're looking for. We're looking for, like, very specific content. So in your demo reel, maybe really having variations of it. If you're interested in, like, you know, a game like a first person shooter, like, finding things that are relevant that you've done to help kind of help bridge the gap under understanding what those people are looking for into hiring for their teams. Because they don't want to just hire anyone. They want to hire things that are relevant and that even go beyond sound effects and personality. So
so I'll tell a story that I just ran into with a student of mine, and that is basically what happened was he was at the Academy of Art University at the time, but he had also, first of all, he was looking for a job at Blizzard. So, and they had advertised for some positions and stuff like that. And what had happened though is before this time, he had taken Leonard Paul's School for Video Game Audio course, and he was doing implementation in Wise in Unity for one of these levels and stuff like that. But he already had the background of just like loving the hell out of every Blizzard game, like just playing Warcraft since he was like 10, kind of thing. And so he already had that huge enthusiasm for their product line, if you will, right? And then on top of that, he went and got the training to learn Wise and how to do the implementation and then sound design. So they gave him an animation test, and he apparently knocked it out of the park because he obviously heard it a bunch of times. He knew more about in many cases more about World of Warcraft than the people who were actually at Blizzard because he'd just been there since the very beginning. So anyway, yeah. So he got the job. I mean, so in other words, with those things, in other words, huge enthusiasm and experience with the product, capability of doing good quality sound design, and also ability to put it inside a game, basically, like and trigger it inside a game with like middleware with Wise in this particular case. So I think that's the best combination. I've definitely find that when you're getting into some of the more smaller things, they might want you to actually do a little bit of the actual triggering of the sound, which means you might have to learn a little bit of scripting depending on the thing to be able to figure out how to put that line of code in there to play the footstep or to play the explosion or whatever. None of that's going to ever be a negative against you. No one's going to count that against your ability to do stuff. But anyway, that's just some stuff I found. I wanted to ask. Yeah, go ahead.
I would say each company is going to have its different requirements for sure, and I think
absolutely.
But you've hit on a lot of good ones there.
But anyway, so that's how he got the job. Like literally, he had never had any shipped titles or anything like that. No experience with that. All he had was the skills and the huge enthusiasm and exposure to their IP already. Basically. So one thing that I wanted to ask was your new job. The job as audio lead. What does that mean that is different than designing new sounds for a character, essentially?
Yeah. So, I mean, I obviously designing and being an IC, like I was literally just taking on projects and designing, doing what we had talked about. But now as a lead, I still do some of that same stuff. I still have some IC contribution, but now I have a team,
right?
And the things now that I'm in charge of are making sure that like our pipelines are being supported. And so like in the gameplay world, there's like 5 or 6 different pipelines. And so each one of them needs to have they need to have support. And the support they're very tricky conversations because all of them have things that need to be released. And so it's conversations behind like, we don't want to be a bottleneck. We want to support engineering support, this support, how do we help sustain this, and how do we have the right number of people for this thing? And so it's a lot of that kind of conversation, making sure that the ebbs and flows are correct.
Resource management is what it sounds like to me.
Yes, it can be. Yeah, it's a lot of that. Yep.
People resource management, effectively.
Yeah, that's part of it. Yes, and I think I highly rely on my team. I try to give them as much autonomy. Onboarding takes a little bit of time to get people going, but once you do, it's like I love the people on my team because they're like go-getters. They're they get the job done. They do it at they have high passion, and so it makes things easier for me because like that autonomy allows me to get things done so it can be easier, and then they get things done that make it easier. So it's like our team has a really good communication, ebbs and flows, and the way that we function, it makes it easy.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I often find that like things like that, the managerial roles are there to sort of, in some cases, shield the other people under your team essentially from having to deal with a lot of day-to-day stuff, so that you're managing all that sort of stuff, so that they can just do what they do really well.
Yep.
Make
So
this.
we'll get like a request for audio, and sometimes, and this is my biggest thing, is that you could the request could come in and you only have like 3 days, right?
Yeah.
And you could be upset as an audio person. You could always say like, oh, audio is always forgotten, audio isn't thought of because we're the end of the waterfall, or for whatever reason, and whatever thing your experience has been in the past. And
Right.
I think that I don't want to be the bottleneck or the person who's got a negative perspective that way. I like to think of it as, you know what, let's deal with this now. Or if we can push back, let's push back, but let's get in a room. Let's talk about moving forward, and let's turn this bottleneck into a pipeline of support.
Right.
And then you set us up for success, and then we're going to set you guys up with the project you need on time. And so it's just that kind of conversation. So those things do happen.
Right.
Because not everyone understands audio, and that's okay. And that's our job. Is part of the things that we value is being ambassadors of audio. So we're teaching constantly. People are always changing jobs or going to another team, another game company, new people coming in.
Right.
And I can't verify what their onboarding is that ours is. So we are always teaching and making sure that our pipelines are like very well oiled and moving.
Yeah, that's very cool. No, that's really awesome. Yeah, because that's one of the things. And when you were at Riot, I mean, essentially, you got more. I don't know whether it's part of the onboarding process. Maybe it is. But the idea is that were you encouraged to know what the other departments were doing? At the game company, pretty much from the beginning that you got to Riot, or was this something you kind of just gravitated toward, or that you taught yourself, or that you just thought was important, or what?
Yeah, so we all do that on ourselves. Maybe like someone might say like, "Hey, we're going to look into onboarding. Onboarding wasn't the best," but we have a lot of examples from different disciplines. And if we want to solve something like onboarding has like a set of documentation that we update,
Right.
and no one's just fully, just not one person just owns that. They may like start it and kick it off and have that.
Right.
We do have an audio, we do have a head of audio who does a lot of other things.
Yeah.
But if we want to make that thing better for like our LOL PC League Studio,
Yeah.
then what we can do is we can say, okay, you know what? Like I mentioned earlier, it's a collaboration. I
Right.
can go out and listen to other teams. It's on us, and that's kind of why being passionate is like that's like a very key item, because
Right.
you're going to autonomously go out and do the thing because you were passionate about your team and you want them to grow and learn. So it's like, oh, maybe the art team's doing something really cool. Maybe they have this really cool
Right.
thing that they do, and you want to adapt that. So you go in, you talk to them, adapt it, and then fit it to your thing.
Right.
And that
Now,
could be anyone.
now the question I'm curious about is: was there already a culture of doing that, or did you just finally, or did you see that was something that would be useful for you to do? I guess what I was wondering was whether that was already sort of ingrained into the culture at Riot, in terms of like just looking and seeing what all the other departments are doing, or was that just something that you sort of decided, or maybe you or a couple other people in the audio team decided was a good idea and just brought into the onboarding process?
I think it is in the culture. I really do. I think, because I don't think we're the only people who do that. Now, I don't think that that's what inspired me. I'm not sure, but I know that it's part of the culture. I know that I know that other people have done that. Like I mentioned earlier, Javon Reimer.
Yeah.
He dives into documentation. He really is interested and very passionate about understanding other pipelines, and will go out and do his due diligence. And so that may have been what inspired me. So yeah, I think it's in the culture.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. Yeah, nice. Any other Twitch questions? We're getting wrapped. We're gonna probably take maybe one. I'd say it's 11:59 already.
Leo, you got any final questions?
No, I'm good. It's a lot of really, really good stuff.
All right, we'll do one more from chat. So Zims52, this is related to your audio lead position. How long did it take you to become an audio lead? What was the process like, and any tips on someone looking to assume that position?
Right. How long did it take me? I don't know. I actually didn't really seek it out, so I didn't really capture how long it took me. I've been at Riot for about 8 years, and I started as an associate. So I was, audio mixer and on the skins team, and at that point, I think like became mid. So I think I don't know how long it took. It could have been 5 years, 6 years. I don't know. I never really thought about that. That's probably the hardest question today. I didn't seek it out. It was something that it was a window of opportunity, and the timing was right. And I have a really good rapport with my manager, Matteo Strinati. He's super awesome, and he has a really good method of like, and I think this is what makes a really successful manager is you're looking at all of your reports and you're trying to look at the best way forward for them and trying to think like, okay, what is this person's like trajectory? Where are they going? And so for him, he had a trajectory for me and said, hey, I've got a trajectory for you. What do you think? And what is yours? And so I kind of weigh the odds. I'm like, oh, this is cool. He's been thinking about this for me. And so I took that opportunity, and it's been a really awesome growing experience for me.
That's really good team management, I have to say. Like that they're interested in your career path, like not just as a productive whatever, it's just like that they go, oh, I see this person going that direction. They're good at this. They're good at this. How about we push them in that direction? And of course they give, they offer the option to you rather than just put you into that position or whatever like that.
Yep.
All right. Well, I would say we are well wrapped up at this point in time. So I just want to thank Brandon Reeder for answering awesome questions and being generally awesome and all that sort of stuff. And we are the Game Audio Institute. This is our 4th one of these things. We will be doing more of these. We've got another collaboration planned with Riot sometime in the fall that'll be more larger scale with more schools involved and stuff. So stay tuned on our thing. We've got a YouTube channel that we have got a lot of videos. I've actually been covering the sort of not very commonly covered topic of scripting in Unity audio, which basically means that like if you want to do anything in Unity at all, period, other than play a sound at the beginning of the game, you pretty much have to learn a little bit of scripting at this point in time. So I've got a series on that. We got some other stuff as well. So if you feel like subscribing to us, we also do this stuff, and we also have a Patreon page. And so if you wanted to join up our Patreon, we have a couple of Patreon people that were in the chat with us. So basically, if you're interested, let us know what you want, and we'll get back to you and stuff. But in the meantime, I want to thank Brandon for coming over, and we'll do another one of these things.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for the questions.
Super enlightening. Very, very, very helpful. Cool, man. All right, so we are out of here. So we'll see you again next time. Take care.